Hi, everyone. Welcome to our channel. Captain World. Douglas Macgregor highlights the significance of the question and notes the surprising nature of the Russian operation in Ukraine. He suggests that President Putin's motives include opposition to NATO expansion near Russian borders, cited concerns dating back 15 years. Macgregor emphasizes Putin's objection to the prospect of Crimea becoming a NATO naval base, particularly for the U.S. Navy in the Black Sea. So he proceeded with that strategy, initially expressing a need for it to cease. What unfolded next was the Kiev coup, now referred to by Ukrainians as Kiev, resulting in the installment of a compliant government, backed by significant financial support, aimed at bolstering a Ukrainian military focused on countering Russia. Recognizing the potential threat posed by missiles near its borders, capable of reaching its nuclear deterrence swiftly, Putin made the decision to intervene. Initially deploying approximately 90,000 troops in small units, he emphasized minimizing collateral of damage and casualties, particularly among Ukrainian forces, while aiming to demilitarize the region. These individuals were also perceived as Slavic kin, fostering a sense of camaraderie initially felt by the Russians. With this sentiment, he deployed a modest force. Despite facing resistance, which, albeit not resulting in heavy casualties for the Russians, was notable, negotiations revealed a reluctance to reach a settlement, primarily driven by Washington's influence. Recognizing the broader agenda to weaken and ultimately oust his regime, he came to terms with the grim reality. By summer, during a meeting with senior officers, the consensus was clear: initial soft approaches had left them entrenched in a situation demanding a harder stance and more troops, a deviation from his earlier directives. To achieve a conclusive resolution, he recognized the need for a larger and more decisive force equipped with appropriate capabilities. This shift in strategy aimed to consolidate control over approximately 20 to 22% of the territory, primarily inhabited by Russians and rich in resources. The new approach involved fortifying positions and adopting an economy of force mission, allowing Ukrainians to exhaust themselves against these fortified positions. As a result, Ukrainian forces have suffered significant casualties, with estimates ranging from 250,000 to 350,000 soldiers killed or wounded. However, civilian casualty figures remain uncertain, as he has consistently avoided causing harm to innocent civilians despite the strategic adjustments made. So if there's a strike observed recently, the objective was straightforward: targeting foreign forces, including those from the US and UK billeted in a hotel. Despite repeated warnings to evacuate, some remained at risk. In instances where strikes occurred near civilian structures like schools, Ukrainian narratives frame them as deliberate attacks on civilians, although the reality often involved Ukrainian forces using civilian facilities for military purposes, prompting defensive actions from the Russians. This scenario isn't unprecedented, resembling past conflicts in the Middle East. Currently, Ukrainian forces are depleted, contemplating a final counteroffensive with little chance of success against fortified Russian defenses. Amidst this, unrest brews among senior ranks of the Russian military, with differing opinions on how to conclude the conflict. The misalignment here isn't so much about Putin's reluctance to take decisive action to hopefully end the war. It's rooted in his concern over the potential for external intervention, particularly from the US, once the Ukrainian position becomes evidently untenable. There's a historical fear that once Ukraine's situation appears dire, pressure from Washington could mount for intervention, reminiscent of how the U.S. was drawn into the First World War. Presently, significant financial investments have been made, likely leading to pressure from influential entities like BlackRock and Raytheon, shaping government actions. With the Ukrainian forces facing substantial setbacks, there's internal debate over whether to swiftly conclude the conflict or allow further Ukrainian depletion. Moreover, there are discussions in Western circles about potential joint interventions, like a Polish-Lithuanian intervention in western Ukraine, a move requiring US authorization and support. This places Russia at a critical juncture, necessitating a decision on the next course of action. Indeed, President Putin's background in the KGB is noteworthy. One aspect often overlooked about the KGB is that its members were among the few allowed to travel outside the Soviet Union, granting them exposure to the West. Putin, particularly familiar with Germany and even proficient in German, held a perspective that Russia could engage with the West constructively, a stance criticized within Russia, where the prevailing sentiment leans towards viewing the West as an implacable foe. Despite this, Putin's leadership remains popular due to improvements in living standards, prosperity, and the restoration of Russian national pride and his dignity, although his vision of Russia's integration into the broader European context hasn't materialized as he anticipated. His latest official poll in Russia shows him with an approval rating of about 89%, significantly higher than Biden's 30%. This solidifies Putin's position domestically. However, he has long grappled with the question of how far to assert Russia's power. He recognizes the importance of post-conflict relations with Europe and the United States, a departure from historical wartime attitudes. While past conflicts saw little consideration for future coexistence with adversaries, Putin aims for a different outcome. He emphasizes that modern Russia is distinct from the Soviet Union and refutes Ukrainian claims of widespread atrocities committed by the Russian. Putin underscores that his military is not akin to Stalin's force of 1.9, 4.4.4.5, known for its brutality. He remains committed to fostering amicable relations, aiming to steer clear of direct conflict with the United States and NATO. This principle guides much of his decision-making. However, he now faces critical choices. Does he continue with a cautious approach, allowing potential interventions by Poland, Lithuania, or even as back forces in western Ukraine? His ultimate goal is to ensure that Ukraine remains neutral post-conflict, avoiding militarization and refraining from becoming a launch pad for attacks against Russia, a stance akin to the U.S. perspective on Cuba in 1963. Yet achieving this becomes increasingly uncertain if permits foreign forces to enter western Ukraine. Additionally, senior officers in the Army and the Pentagon have emphasized the inadequacy of conventional warfare capabilities against Russia. I doubt it simply because presenting such a position to the government's decision-makers is met with entrenched animosity and antipathy towards Moscow and its values. They seem to be wearing ideological blinders, unwilling to entertain alternative viewpoints. The core part of this hostility stems from Putin's initial actions, which to the West conveyed weakness and ineptitude. Subsequently, Western narratives perpetuated this perception with propaganda reminiscent of World War II-era portrayals of the Soviets, drawing on outdated stereotypes. However, the current military landscape tells a different story. With a substantial concentration of troops in the western and southern military districts, Russia possesses a formidable force equipped with cutting-edge technology. Even the most skeptical observers are taken aback by the efficiency and effectiveness of Russian missile and strike capabilities. In southern Ukraine, the region referred to by Russians as Novorossiya, spanning from Odessa to Kharkov, much of it is now under Russian control regarding academic qualifications. It's important to note that while many hold PhDs, not all possess practical knowledge or expertise. Personally, I focused on military studies during my graduate education, aligning with my profession as a soldier and recognizing the responsibility associated with public funding. My concentration was primarily on military affairs concerning the Soviet Union, East Germany, Poland, and Czechoslovakia. Reflecting on Putin's willingness to negotiate, there was a pivotal moment early in the conflict when he signaled readiness to embrace a ceasefire during negotiations. This gesture aimed to demonstrate seriousness and commitment to the peace process. Central to these negotiations were the Minsk Accords, often overlooked in the West, which promised equal rights for Russian-speaking Ukrainians, including linguistic and cultural freedoms. However, it became evident that these promises were not upheld, as acknowledged by Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron, who admitted to misleading Russia to buy time for Ukraine's military buildup.